45, 30 minutes. So first and foremost, did we have any questions from last week regarding this topic? Have you done anything differently with your athletes this week because of it?
So essentially it's just your perception of what it should feel like.
So if I was asking you now, we posed this question last week, what is pain, or why do people have pain? And the vast majority in the room had a tissue-based model thought process. Have you changed your ideas even slightly?
I'll just leave these days.
Don't worry, you nod. Yeah, maybe a little bit. All right. So we'll keep going, but the aim of this obviously is to try and expand your knowledge in this area, and hopefully over time you might start to approach your athletes a little bit differently. So we finished off last week just discussing the integration of the brain. Follow on with that in a little bit more detail, and this was a quote from Ramachandran looking at really the concept that pain is more of an opinion regarding the overall state of well-being of the organism. I'll use that analogy of satellites moving around the Earth, constantly surveilling what's going on and reporting back, and comparing that to this genetic template of body self. And that was along the lines of the neuromatrix theory of pain by Ronald Melzack. So we sort of move on and we go, okay, well, what do we now know about the brain and how this relates? So we have the opportunity now with functional MRI studies, so studies that are looking more at metabolic activity within the brain, so blood flow patterns, to understand what's happening inside our heads literally when we experience pain. So certain areas of the brain tend to become active, and it's quite, as you can already see, quite distributed. It's not one, we don't have a single pain centre in our brain. We have a variety of areas that are going to become active. So, and this will vary from individual to individual, but fundamentally, multiple cortical areas are active with some sort of noxious stimulus. The advantage of this type of imaging is that you can do some really cool stuff now where you can image someone who's experiencing pain, apply an intervention, and then reassess what's happening at a cortical level. Does it change? And I'm not sure in this presentation if we have this, but we'll find out soon. But there's some very, very cool studies that look at the power of education, and this is one of the reasons why we feel this topic so important for you, even in the field of exercise science, is that studies have looked at those cortical patterns of activation, and they've seen these areas that are lighting up, and they're quite often widespread with people that often have chronic or persistent pain. You can apply an education session. In a particular study that was done by Lorimer Mosley, patients underwent a 2-hour education session on pain physiology, talking about why we experience pain, very much like what we're doing now, and then they imaged these patients and showed a complete change in cortical activity, but also pain experienced by the person, and also in some cases improvements in movement patterns and muscle activation, just through education, nothing else. So, take-home message is, it's a little saying that seems a bit corny, bit of a dad joke, but no pain, as in K-N-O-W, no pain or no gain. If you don't understand this as a health professional, you will struggle to move your patients forward, sometimes at an appropriate speed. So you actually do need to have a base level understanding of these topics, I think, to help you when you're out there managing your patients or your clients. Remember we touched on this concept of a neurotag. Can you remember what I talked about with respect to a neurotag? This is kind of it's like the areas of activity that occur in the brain with a certain stimulus or a certain pattern. Right? So think of a neurotag. I think a good analogy for a neurotag is it's like the road map. It's the path that the brain follows to get somewhere. So in the case of chronic pain or a recurring problem, a neurotag, I was having a chat with you, but a neurotag is sometimes dysfunctional. Now you may have to retrain a neurotag. So for example, if you looked at something like spinal flexion, and just say for someone that's painful, touching their toes elicits low back pain. How else could you produce or produce a similar movement pattern but not run exactly the same roadmap? You're not allowed to answer. More, so you're laying on your back doing like a straight leg raise? How close is that to this? What's the difference? If spinal flexion is provocative and I'm in a standing position, how else could you achieve spinal flexion but maybe with less load, for example?
Sit and reach.
Sorry?
Sit and reach.
Sit and reach might be one option, yep. What's another one? How else can you get, if I said to you, show me a way to make someone's lumbar spine flex, but you're not allowed to do it in standing, and you're not allowed to do a sit and reach test.
Sitting in a chair.
Sitting in a chair?
Sitting in a chair.
Yep, absolutely. Touch your ankles. So, lay on your back, bring your knees to your chest. So similar patterns. So you're driving a similar road, but it's not quite the same road. So that if you think of neurotags like that, that's sometimes how you can retrain movement that may have been experienced as being painful, but you don't elicit the exact same neurotag that's been causing the experience of pain. So that's why I think the analogy of a road map and certain towns you visit along the way, you have to visit some of the towns sometimes, but not all of them. Certain towns are going to be bad and they're going to elicit a certain response. So that's the sort of thing when you're retraining movement, you sometimes have to become creative in retraining a movement pattern in a similar way, but not the same. Okay? That's where a concept of a neurotag in athletic rehab comes into play. Brings into the next topic, and probably the next consideration with chronic or recurring conditions of central sensitization. Now, have you heard of this term? So sensitization or central sensitization is really a fundamental change, and if you think of it, it's like an amplification of sometimes sensory input. So central sensitization can occur or start to occur at a spinal cord level, and it certainly can occur at the brain. So, and you'll find that when I describe these things, I use analogies a lot. Have you noticed that? Because analogies often work well with patients. So if we come back to our very simple model of input, processing and output, if you think of this, input from the periphery comes to our spinal cord. So it's entering the dorsal horn. It's got its first opportunity to now be magnified, for the want of a better word, or access ascending pathways that perhaps that sensory input should not access. So within the dorsal horn, we have a variety of cells, but one in particular, wide dynamic range neurons. Okay, so these neurons respond to a wide range of input, but in certain situations, input that comes to the spinal cord and gains access to those wide dynamic range neurons can in turn access ascending nociceptive pathways. So you might have a movement, say elbow movement, is now accessing, rather than proprioceptive information, mechanoreceptive information being perceived, it is now entering and accessing ascending nociceptive pathways because it is travelling through, for the want of a better word, through a wide dynamic range neuron. So if you think of a wide dynamic range neuron like a gate, and this is where you'll often hear about the gate control theory, and it's moved on a little bit like that, but wide dynamic range neurons kind of give access to input to pathways that they normally wouldn't be allowed to go down. It's probably the simplest way of describing that process occurring at the dorsal horn. So now once you have input going to the brain and it hits the brain itself, your brain's only able to deal with what's coming in. It it doesn't know if that information is accurate or not, but it's just going to deal with what it's receiving. So rather than just getting mechanoreceptive information, now all of a sudden your brain is getting information that it thinks is coming along a nociceptive pathway. So it's paying attention to the fact, well, I need to listen, something's not right with my elbow. So the moment, you remember the analogy we used last week about your actual body self and your predicted body self, if they're the same, if that input is the same, generally speaking, your brain's going to be pretty happy, all right? The moment there's a mismatch, your brain's thinking something's not right here. There's a change in input. There could be a problem. Therefore, I'm going to make this person pay attention to this information. I'm going to make that area or that region painful so that they change their movement, take away load. Because at the end of the day, what do you think is one of the fundamental reasons, both adaptive and maladaptive, to why we experience pain?
Prevent further harm to the body.
Yeah, why? What is our fundamental, most primitive survival? So we are at a very, very primitive level. We are totally wired to survive and reproduce. That's it. Like any other mammal, that's our fundamental. These primitive pathways are always geared towards survival. So it's about preservation of the organism. Now, that can serve a purpose that's sometimes adaptive. You know, if you sprained your ankle, you might limp around on it for a few days, tissues heal, your ankle's functioning normally again, you can run, you can jump, you can do what you need to do. But if that ankle causes you to limp for the next 3 years and you can no longer run away from the line, you're not going to be surviving very long, are you? So even on a very basic level, you've got to consider that pain does serve adaptive and quite useful purposes, but in a chronic situation it becomes maladaptive. So probably one of the things that we need to consider is that in many instances, if you look at the incidence of chronic pain since the 1950s and 1960s, we had a graph here of we doing this, skyrocketing. Why do you think we're, and this is the studies that have looked at it in Western society, why do you think it is that in Western society we're seeing more and more people who are experiencing chronic pain? This is right down your alley, guys, this question. Tell me about what's happening generally in Western society. Sorry? Yeah? So what's that flow, what's the bigger picture of that? Inactivity. What happens when we're inactive? Reel off some of the things that happen when we're inactive. Musculoskeletal. Loss of movement. Good muscle strength, poor muscle strength. Poor. Good cardiovascular well-being, poor cardiovascular well-being. Poor. What else? What happens when we don't exercise? Healthy levels of body fat, excessive levels of body fat. What else? A variety of sensory inputs or very little sensory input. So if we come back to what your brain is expecting you should be achieving from your body and what you're actually doing, are they matching? Are we as people in Western society, are we maximising our physical potential in most cases in our modern world? What would you say, yes or no? And I'm going to talk about elite athletes here, because that's the different end of the spectrum. They definitely go after that. But the general population, are they close to seeing or realising their physical potential? Absolutely not. So your genetic template, your body self-template, is nowhere near what is the input that your brain is expecting you to receive. Does that make sense to you all?
So you're saying that we have less sensory input because we're having less exercise and whatnot. And
less movement.
Yeah, so then in that case, where our bodies are trying to get that sensory input, so we're more receptive to pain. So
no, at the end of the day, your brain's expecting, this is, you should be a healthy, fit, mobile, strong specimen. This is it here, but it is. Do they match? So this is where that paper I was talking about, that neuromatrix theory of pain, conceptually, I think is really important, because that's, I think, what you've got to kind of come back to and understanding it. Western society, what's the other thing that we flow into? This is bringing in the other elements. So we've talked about the physical side. So we're not moving, we're deconditioned, we're not strong, we're missing out on a whole heap of different sensory and proprioceptive inputs, movement variety. What's the other thing about poor posture? What does it do to your spinal cord? Lengthen it or shorten it? If my spinal cord's here, am I lengthening it or shortening it? Your spinal cord moves about 5 to 7 centimetres from flexion to neutral. So an important thing to consider is that sustained flexion is like wringing out a towel. You are slowing blood flow and you are slowing the movement of the nutrient material that keeps the nervous system happy and healthy, which is called axoplasm. So sustained flexion is not good for the human nervous system. We need movement, the nervous system needs movement, even on a mechanical level, because it needs that blood flow and it needs the movement of axoplasm to keep the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system happy and healthy. So that's why we are, as a species, we are designed to move. We are not designed to sit still. We're human beings can sweat, we can cope with large variations in temperature. We're designed to be mobile. We are not designed to sit still. And that's why you hear that sitting's kind of like the new smoking. They're realising now that, geez, this is causing a whole host of problems. Right? So movement, we need to move. So flowing on to our discussion, I know I'm diverting, but it's kind of conceptually important. What's the other big thing that's changed in Western society in the last, since the 50s and 60s, 1950s, 1960s? Exercise levels have plummeted. What else has changed?
Diet.
Bingo. What's happened to our diet? In a snapshot, if you had to summarise what we do now compared to what probably your grandparents would have done with their diet, what do we do? So what are we taking in that we probably weren't? Processed foods, which are generally what? High in sodium, high in fat, Gatorade, sugar. So these things, these changing food sources, have an impact on the gut and have an impact on all the microorganisms, all the microbes in your guts. They're not designed to take huge volumes of sugar and processed food. And this will be the next big wave I think you'll see in medicine, is that a focus on making sure that gastrointestinal health is optimised. You're starting to see it flowing into things like autoimmune issues and even things like diabetes. They're looking more closely at the link between the health of the gut and a whole variety of other health and autoimmune conditions. But the reason why it's so relevant with pain is if you don't have a healthy gut, you will not have a healthy immune system. If your immune system is not working well, the likelihood that you'll experience pain, widespread, local, referred, or whatever, is very high. Does anyone know why? What happens when you get the flu? Would you say that you can feel sore and achy and stiff? Would you agree with that? Bit headachy? So having the flu gives you pain. Do you see the link? Why? Why does that happen? What happens when our immune system's busy fighting something? Not necessarily, because now we have a change in chemical environment. So now we have this signalling process occurring between the immune system and the central nervous system. One of those signalling processes that is involved are chemicals or little subproteins called cytokines. So cytokine signalling is a very, very complex phenomenon, and we can fill a wall with what happens. But fundamentally, cytokines can have a pro-inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory effect. But certain cytokines, they're the ones that can, if they elevate, and they often will elevate in response to an infection or a viral insult or whatever it may be, will make you feel sore and stiff and headachy and lethargic. The interesting thing is, if you were to describe your posture when you have the flu, how would you demonstrate your posture? This or this? Which one would it be? Not flu, flu. So isn't it interesting how just a change in the state of the organism affects the motor system? Can you sit up? Do you feel vibrant? Can you stand tall when you have the flu? Generally not, because you're just lethargic. So do you see how these systems all interrelate? And this is one of the big take-home messages, and hopefully one of the things you understand in pain is a very multi-system, integrated experience. It's not just tissue. And that's one of the, if you learn nothing about these couple of talks I've given you, that's all you remember, is pain is a very multi-dimensional, multi-system experience. I'd be really happy with that. Because you'll start to have these athletes that are going, you know, oh, my back's really sore and achy. Geez, I've been sore on my guts lately too. And you go, well, what are you eating? And you go, oh, I've been chugging down 3 Gatorades a day, and I've been running to Macca's after training. What would you be starting to become suspicious of? Their gut health may be absolutely off the charts. Okay, terrible. The moment that goes, you can very easily get referred pain to your back from your stomach or from your intestinal tract. Okay. So this is the sort of stuff that sometimes people don't consider. And particularly with things like with DRAPAC, and the irony of all of this is that even with the Pat's Veg cycling team, Pat's Veg products are all about natural probiotics, fermented vegetables, things that probably our grandparents and your great-grandparents would have had normally. Fermented foods, natural foods, minimal processed stuff, minimal wheat. We have huge amounts of processed wheat in our modern Western diets. All of these things change gut health. So I could, if you gave me a team, you could improve their performance by changing their gut health. And this is what's always interesting in the elite world, is that people are chasing these 1%ers. That's a big chunk. You get your team eating right, and I'm not talking about just making sure they've got enough carbs and enough protein, paying attention to optimizing their gut well-being, because you can have that, athletes can have that tested now. You can know what athletes should be doing with their gut flora, and all of these things flow into performance, and they can certainly flow into influencing pain as well. So I'm going to stop there, because I've deviated. Is there any questions? Right.
At the start, on what you said, has any one of us implemented something that we learned from last week instead of the way we're training? Now, my concept and sort of understanding of how the neurological side has its role in strength training, that's definitely changed my way of thinking, but to actually implement that. I'm going into deep enough thought.
That's fine. So maybe one of the things that we can look at over the next, I think we've only got another week or two of term, but maybe one of the things we can look at is how do you integrate the input stuff to change the output for both for just improvements in motor function as well as helping with pain. And there's some really simple things I can teach you that can change that, where you can instantly change someone's perception of pain or experience of pain, and or if they're having a problem with the movement, and you can change that.
Could you give us a specific example?
Yep. Have a chat with Stephen about his knee next time you see him, and providing input around the L2-3 perceptron with his functional activities like the single leg squats and the like, and then both manually, and then following that up with quite specific trigger pointing, and then having instant changes in his perception of function and strength, and even with single leg press and the like, within minutes. Yeah, that's the stuff that becomes really cool because it blows your athlete's minds. They'll be like, oh, I can't do this. I'm struggling. It hurts my knee. You will do something where you might get them doing some trigger pointing around L2, L3, L4, because that's where the supply to your knee comes via the femoral nerve. Okay, let's have a look at it again. Oh, now I can, geez, that feels heaps better. What have you done? You've just changed the input, therefore you change the processing, you change the output. just keep thinking about that integrative model. It's very simplistic, but it will work. If the output is not working, if someone's not moving the way you want them to move, change the input. Okay? Done. Thanks, Gavin.
Hey, Stu.